Las Vegas shimmered under the desert sun, a mirage of neon and dreams. Inside the International Hotel buzzed with an electric current, all leading to one man. He was the king, the undisputed ruler of this glittering city, commanding sold-out shows night after night. His voice, a velvet roar, shook the foundations, and his hips, a force of nature, brought thousands to their feet, screaming his name. Backstage, moments before the curtain rose, the air crackled with anticipation. Elvis, dressed in a pristine white jumpsuit, studs gleaming under the harsh lights, was a picture of calm power. His hair was perfectly coiffed, his eyes bright. He shared a laugh with Charlie Hodge, his trusted friend and guitar tech, and exchanged a warm glance with his musicians, the TCB band taking care of business. They were family, brothers in sound, and together they were unstoppable. Elvis loved this life. He loved the music, the roar of the crowd, the way he could pour his heart out on stage and feel it return 1,000-fold. He was a simple country boy from Tupelo, Mississippi, who'd found his voice, and he never forgot where he came from. He was generous sometimes to a fault, always ready to lend a hand, sign an autograph, or give away a Cadillac to a stranger who needed it more. Tonight, however, a tiny, almost imperceptible shadow seemed to cling to the edges of his usual excitement. It had started subtly a few days ago, a strange phone call to his hotel room, a deep, gravelly voice asking if he was enjoying his run. Elvis had just chuckled, assuming it was a playful fan or someone trying to get a rise out of him. He was used to eccentric characters in Vegas. Then yesterday, a small, unmarked envelope had appeared under his dressing room door. Inside, there was no note, just a single tarnished silver dollar coin. It wasn't worth anything, not really. But there was something about its dull finish and the quiet way it had arrived that sent a shiver down his spine. It felt deliberate. A message. He'd tried to shake it off. Maybe just a weird fan. But then, during rehearsal that afternoon, a new face had appeared in the shadows near the stage. A man in a dark suit, impeccably dressed, but with eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He wasn't part of the hotel staff, nor was he someone Elvis recognized from the usual crowd of managers, security, or music executives. The man had just stood there watching, unsmiling. Later, as Elvis was leaving the stage, the man had stepped forward just enough to catch his eye and given him a slow, almost imperceptible nod. No smile, no word, just that nod. And then he'd vanished as quickly as he'd appeared. Elvis had mentioned it to Joe Esposito, his road manager, and a close friend trying to make light of it. Seen any new faces around? Got a guy looking like he's auditioning for a gangster movie watching rehearsal. Joe had just shrugged, attributing it to the usual parade of characters in Vegas, all trying to get a piece of the action or just catch a glimpse of the king. But as he stood there tonight, the roar of the crowd already reaching him through the thick walls, a knot tightened in Elvis's stomach. The silver dollar, the strange phone call, the silent man in the dark suit, they were starting to form a pattern that felt less like a harmless prank and more like a warning. He pushed the thought away. He had a show to do. Thousands of people were waiting, their hearts open, ready to be swept away by the magic. He couldn't let anything break his focus. He was Elvis Presley, and on that stage he was invincible. But as he walked towards the wings, the heavy velvet curtain waiting to part, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching, someone who wanted more than just a show, someone who wanted a piece of the king himself. And that feeling, however small, was a chilling one, a discordant note in the otherwise perfect symphony of his life. He took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and prepared to face his adoring public, unaware that a more sinister kind of audience member might be lurking in the crowd tonight. The show was, as always, magnificent. Elvis poured every ounce of his heart and soul into the performance. The crowd was a swirling ocean of adulation, their energy feeding his own. For those 2 hours, the creeping unease vanished, replaced by the sheer joy of making music. He hit every note, perfected every move, and left the stage drenched in sweat but buzzing with exhilaration. Back in his suite, after the cheers had faded and the last fan had been waved goodbye, the feeling of dread returned. He was sitting on the plush velvet couch, a half-eaten peanut butter and banana sandwich on a plate beside him. Joe Esposito, Larry Geller, his spiritual advisor and hairdresser, and another member of his Memphis Mafia inner circle, were gathered, talking quietly about the night's performance. Elvis cleared his throat. "Guys," he began, his voice a little softer than usual. "I need to talk to you about something." 3 sets of eyes turned to him, sensing the shift in his tone. "It's probably nothing," he continued, running a hand through his damp hair. "But there have been a few strange things happening." He recounted the phone call, the silver dollar, and the silent man in the dark suit at rehearsal. He watched their faces as he spoke, seeing the amusement drain away, replaced by growing concern. Joe, ever the pragmatist, leaned forward. "You? Serious, E? You think someone's trying to, muscle in?" Elvis shrugged. "I don't know, it just feels off. Not like a normal fan, or even a publicity stunt. It feels like a warning." Picked up the silver dollar from the coffee table, turning it over in his fingers. "This thing. It's got a weird vibe." Larry Geller, always attuned to deeper currents, nodded slowly. "Sometimes when you reach this level of fame, it attracts all sorts of people who want a piece of what you've built, or worse, want to control it." Marty Lacker, more street smart, added, "Vegas is full of those types, especially with the kind of money your shows are pulling in, mobsters, hustlers." The word mobsters hung in the air, cold and heavy. Elvis had always tried to keep a clean image, to stay away from the seedy underbelly of the entertainment world. He sang gospel and rock and roll. He wasn't involved in anything illegal. The idea of being targeted by organized crime was unsettling. "What do you think they want?" Elvis asked, his brow furrowed. "Protection money, a cut of your earnings, maybe influence over your career." Joe rattled off the possibilities. "Or they could be trying to scare you into doing something, playing a private gig for them, endorsing something shady." Elvis's jaw tightened. "Not gonna happen. No one's gonna tell me what to do on that stage. My music is mine." Marty looked around the opulent suite. "We need to be careful, E. These aren't just regular thugs. They play rough. They send messages like this because they want you to know they're serious, without having to say a word over the next few days." A rose delivered to Priscilla's dressing room, beautiful, but with its thorns deliberately removed, a chilling detail. A slight, almost unnoticeable malfunction with his sound equipment during a sound check, fixed quickly but enough to make the sound engineer pale. A discreet note slipped into one of his custom belt buckles, reading simply, "Watch your step, King." Elvis tried to maintain his outward calm, but the tension was palpable amongst his inner circle. They increased security, discreetly watching every new face, every unexpected visitor. But these were professionals, masters of blending in, of making their presence felt without overt action. One evening, Vernon, Elvis's father, called from Graceland. He'd heard whispers, the kind that travel across the country, especially when a son as famous as Elvis was involved. "Son, you all right out there? Heard some chatter about trouble." Elvis tried to reassure him, minimizing the threat. "Just the usual Vegas nonsense, Pop. Don't you worry, we've got it handled." But as he hung up, he knew he was lying. He didn't have it handled. He wasn't sure how to handle it. The pressure mounted. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about his family, his band, his loyal staff. He was the target, but they were in the crosshairs by association. The thought that someone he cared about could be hurt because of him was a bitter pill to swallow. He looked at the glittering Vegas skyline from his window. This city, once a playground, now felt like a gilded cage. He could fight, sure, but what good would that do against an unseen enemy, with unlimited resources and no rules? He remembered his early days, playing small clubs, facing down hecklers and tough crowds with just his guitar and his voice. He'd never backed down then. He wouldn't back down now. But this was different. This wasn't a challenge to his music. This was a challenge to his very soul, an attempt to control him, and that he knew he could never allow. He might not know how he would fight back, but he knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't let them take his stage or his spirit. The weight of the crown felt heavier than usual. Elvis sat alone in his suite, the city lights painting streaks across the ceiling. He was surrounded by luxury, by the trappings of his incredible success, yet he felt profoundly isolated. The fear wasn't for himself, not really. He'd faced down critics, the public's changing tastes, and the relentless demands of fame. He was strong, but the thought of anyone in his circle, Priscilla, Vernon, the guys in the band, his loyal crew, being caught in the crossfire, that was a different kind of terror. He thought of the look in Joe Esposito's eyes, the quiet worry in Marty Lacker's voice. Even Charlie Hodge, usually so jovial, had been subdued lately. They were all feeling the chill, the invisible pressure exerted by these unseen forces. He was their leader, their king, and he felt an immense responsibility to protect them. He closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the cool leather of the couch. His mind drifted back to his childhood in Tupelo, to the little shotgun shack where he'd grown up. He remembered the simple joy of singing in church, the feeling of pure, unadulterated music flowing through him. Back then, it was just about the song, about expressing something deep inside. There were no threats, no calculations, no demands. Then came Memphis Sun Records and the explosion. He became Elvis, the boy who fused black and white music, who dared to move his hips, who made teenagers swoon and parents gasp. He fought for his right to express himself, for his music to be heard. He built his empire note by note, performance by performance, to sheer talent and a relentless work ethic. And now, here he was at the pinnacle facing a silent battle with shadows. He could give and pay whatever they demanded, then make the problem disappear. But the very idea repulsed him. It would be a surrender, not just of money, but of his integrity. It would mean admitting that someone else had a say in his life, in his art, and that he knew he could never do. He was the king, not because he wore a cape or a crown, but because he stood for something. He stood for freedom, for expression, for the power of music to transcend boundaries. To bow to intimidation would be to betray everything he believed in, everything he had built. But what could he do? He was a singer, not a fighter. His weapons were his voice, his guitar, his stage presence. Could those be enough against men who used fear and violence? He got up and walked to the window, looking out at the glittering lights of Vegas. Below, tiny cars moved like ants, and distant music drifted up from the casinos. He saw his reflection in the glass, a tall, imposing figure, but in his eyes he saw the question. He thought of the thousands of faces in the audience. Every night, their adoration, a powerful, palpable force. They came for escape, for joy. For a few hours of magic, they didn't come to see a man cowering in fear. They came to see the king, fearless and magnificent. A memory sparked in his mind, a gospel hymn his mother used to sing about standing firm in faith. Faith, not just in God, but in himself, in his purpose. His purpose was to perform, to connect, to share his gift, and he would not let anyone, no matter how powerful or menacing, take that from him. He had to respond. Not with violence, not with threats, but with the very thing they were trying to control. His performance, his stage was his kingdom, his music, his weapon. He would show them not with words, but with his actions, that he was untouchable on that stage. He would show them he was truly fearless. The idea, once a whisper, began to solidify into a resolve. It was risky. It was unconventional, but it was his way. He was unconformant into their dirty game. He would use his stage as his battleground and his voice as his defiant roar. He walked over to his guitar leaning in the corner and picked it up. His fingers found the familiar chords and a melody slow and soulful began to emerge. It was a blues tune, full of longing and resilience. As he played, the knot in his stomach began to loosen. The fear hadn't vanished entirely, but it had shifted transformed into a steely determination. He was ready. He knew what he had to do. The days leading up to the next run of shows were like walking on eggshells. The atmosphere backstage was thick with unspoken tension. The silent man in the dark suit, the one Elvis had first noticed, was no longer a fleeting shadow. He was now a regular fixture, always in the same spot, always watching his presence. A cold, steady pressure. Sometimes he'd be joined by another equally silent, equally unnerving companion. Elvis, ever, the professional, maintained his dazzling smile and boundless energy for the cameras and the public. He greeted fans, signed autographs, and joked with the hotel staff. But beneath the surface, a quiet war was raging. He felt their eyes on him, a constant irritating glare, trying to break his composure, to make him crack during rehearsals. The pressure was even more intense. The mobster's presence was no longer limited to the wings. Sometimes the silent man would sit in the empty theater just a few rows back, watching every move, every note. It was a calculated psychological game designed to make Elvis feel constantly observed, constantly under scrutiny. One afternoon, during a particularly intense run-through of Suspicious Minds, Elvis stumbled on a lyric, something he rarely did. His mind, for a split second, had wandered to the cold eyes watching him from the dark. He recovered instantly, powering through, but the moment was a stark reminder of the insidious nature of the threat. They weren't hitting him physically. They were trying to chip away at his focus, his confidence, his very spirit. Charlie Hodge, who stood closest to Elvis on stage, could feel it. He'd seen the subtle shifts in Elvis's posture, the way his eyes would occasionally dart towards the shadows. He'd tried to offer quiet words of encouragement, a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You got this, E," he'd whisper, right before the lights came up. The band members, too, noticed the change. The easy camaraderie backstage was still there, but tinged with an underlying anxiety. They were loyal to Elvis, ready to stand by him, but they were also aware of the dangerous game being played. Musicians thrive on spontaneity and joy, and this dark cloud threatened to stifle that. Elvis, however, refused to let it. He used his music as his shield. He would lose himself in the rhythm, in the lyrics, in the sheer power of his voice. Practiced longer, harder, pouring every ounce of his frustration and defiance into his songs. Each note became an act of rebellion, each hip swivel a statement of freedom. He found solace in the quiet moments of connection with his band. During a break, James Burton, his lead guitarist, played a slow, soulful blues riff, and Elvis just hummed along, letting the music wash over him. Ronnie Tutt, the drummer, would lay down a powerful beat, and Elvis would find himself moving lost in the rhythm, forgetting the outside world for a precious few minutes. Even amidst the tension, there were sparks of the old Elvis. He'd crack a joke, pull a prank on Joe, or suddenly launch into an impromptu gospel song in the dressing room, his voice filling the space with an almost spiritual power. These moments were vital, reminding everyone, including himself, what they were fighting for. He also spent time alone, meditating, praying, trying to center himself. He thought about the gospel songs that had always given him strength, the ones that spoke of overcoming trials and standing tall. He knew his performance wasn't just about entertainment anymore. It was about courage. It was about proving to himself, to his team, and to those who wished him ill, that he was unbreakable. The silent glare of the mobster was a constant companion, a chilling reminder of the stakes. But with each passing hour, Elvis's resolve hardened. He wasn't just going to survive this. He was going to conquer it. He was going to turn this dark chapter into a testament of his spirit. The stage awaited, and he knew exactly how he was going to answer the threat. It wouldn't be with a whisper, but with a roar. Pressure from the mobsters continued to mount, a suffocating blanket woven from silent blares and subtle disruptions. Elvis felt it, the gnawing anxiety that threatened to steal his joy in music. Yet, amidst the gloom, something beautiful began to emerge, the unwavering support of his inner circle. One afternoon, after a particularly draining rehearsal, where the air conditioning mysteriously stopped working for an hour, making the entire band sweat through their clothes. Elvis slumped into a chair, looking utterly defeated. The silent man had been watching his presence, a chilling counterpoint to their discomfort. Larry Geller, ever perceptive, sat beside him. Instead, he just started talking about the first time he saw Elvis perform. You know, I remember seeing you for the first time. It wasn't about the honesty in your voice. The way you just gave everything. That's what people fell in love with. That's what they still come for. Elvis looked up, a flicker of something returning to his eyes. Then Joe Esposito walked in carrying a tray of iced tea and a plate of Elvis's favorite cookies. All right, King, break time. We're not letting these goons steal our appetite or our spirit. They want us stressed. We'll just eat more and sing louder. He winked. And for the first time in days, Elvis genuinely smiled. TCB and his musical family started rallying around him in their own ways. James Burton, usually a man of few words, would lay down a particularly searing guitar solo during practice, his eyes meeting Elvis's, a silent message of defiance and solidarity. Ronnie Tutt, with his powerful drumming, seemed to be hitting the drums with even more force, as if each beat was a challenge to the unseen enemies. The Sweet Inspirations, his backup singers, were a constant source of warmth. Cissy Houston, Marna Smith, Estelle Brown, and Sylvia Shemwell, with their powerful, soulful voices, would wrap Elvis in a blanket of sound. During one particularly tense rehearsal, Cissy, seeing the strain on his face, stepped forward. "Elvis," she said, her voice warm but firm, "you just sing. We got your back. Every note, every harmony. We're with you." Her words resonated deeply. It wasn't just a band. It was a chorus of loyalty. They weren't just musicians. They were friends, family, a fortress of sound and spirit. That evening, Elvis decided to spend some time signing autographs for fans at the hotel lobby, something he usually did to connect with his audience. As he greeted them, their faces lit up with pure joy and admiration. A young girl, maybe 10 years old, handed him a crudely drawn picture of him on stage, wearing a cape. "You're my hero, Mr. Presley," she said, her eyes wide with adoration. Her innocent words struck him like a bolt of lightning. She saw him as fearless as a hero, and he realized in that moment that he had to be. Not just for himself, not just for his team, but for every single person who looked up to him, who found hope and joy in his music. He couldn't let them down. He couldn't let anyone see the king of rock and roll cower. The glimmer of hope became a flame. He saw the strength in his friends' unwavering loyalty, the power in his band's collective talent, and the profound responsibility he felt towards his fans. He wasn't alone in this. He had an army of love and music behind him. That night, back in his suite, Elvis picked up his guitar again. He began to play, not the blues, but a powerful gospel tune, his voice strong and clear. He thought about the mobsters, the cold eyes, the silent threats. They wanted to break him. They wanted to control him, but they didn't understand. They didn't understand the power of music, the strength of an artist's spirit, or the unbreakable bond he shared with his people. He smiled. He knew what his response would be. It wouldn't be a negotiation. It would be on his terms, on his stage, and it would be unforgettable. The strategy was forming clear and sharp in his mind. The morning after his moment of clarity, Elvis called a meeting. Not just Joel, Marty, and Larry, but also Charlie Hodge, James Burton, Ronnie Tutt, and the Sweet Inspirations. The room felt heavy, anticipating what Elvis had to say. "All right, listen up," Elvis began, his voice steady, devoid of the usual playfulness. He looked at each of them, meeting their eyes. "You all know what's been going on? The whispers, the weird messages, those guys watching us." He paused, letting the unspoken fear in the room settle. "They want to scare me. They want a piece of me, a piece of what we've built. They want to control me." He clenched his fist. "But I'm not going to let them. Not now. Not ever. So what's the plan? E. We call the cops, get more muscle, try to find out who's behind it. Elvis shook his head. No, that's their game. That's how they want us to play. And we're not going to play by their rules. We're going to play by ours. He stood up, pacing the room, his white jumpsuit almost glowing in the morning light. My stage, my rules, my music, my voice. He stopped, turning to face them. My plan is this. We hit them where they least expect it. We use the show, we use the music. We show them without saying a single word that I'm not afraid, that I'm unbreakable. A ripple of murmurs went through the room. Charlie Hodge looked bewildered. You mean you're gonna sing a song about it? Elvis chuckled. A dry sound. No, Charlie, not like that. No direct call-outs. No names, that would be too easy for them. They want a reaction. I'm gonna give them a performance, the greatest performance of my life. One that's screwing, his eyes burning with intensity. Every note, every move, every word. It's all going to be a message that says, you can threaten me, you can watch me, but you cannot touch my spirit. You cannot break my connection with my music, or with my fans. You cannot control the king. Ronnie Tutt, ever the musician, tapped out a slow beat on his knee. So more power, more intensity. Exactly, Elvis affirmed. We're going to pour every ounce of our hearts into this show. It's going to be the most authentic, most passionate performance we've ever given. It's going to radiate pure, unadulterated strength. We're going to prove that creativity and courage are more powerful than any threat. Joe Esposito, always thinking practicalities, raised an eyebrow. But how will they know it's a message? Won't it just look like another incredible show? That's the beauty of it, Joe Elvis said, a sly smile playing on his lip. The audience won't know. They'll just feel the power, the raw emotion. But those guys watching, the ones who sent the coin, the ones trying to intimidate us, they will know, they'll feel it. They'll see that their threats didn't diminish me. They amplified me. They made me stronger. The sweet inspirations exchanged glances. Then Sissy Houston nodded. We understand, Elvis. We'll sing with every fiber of our being for you and for the music. James Burton adjusted his glasses. We'll make that guitar wail. Make it scream defiance. Larry Geller placed a hand on Elvis's shoulder. This is a truly spiritual battle. You're fighting for your soul, for your art, and you're doing it with integrity. I believe in this. The room, once heady with fear, now hummed with a different kind of energy, determination, unity, and a shared purpose. They weren't just a band. They were an army, ready to fight with their instruments and their voices. Elvis looked at their faces, seeing their trust, their loyalty, and their newfound courage. We'll choose songs that carry a double meaning, Elvis continued, already envisioning the set list. Songs about standing strong, about not backing down, about the power of love and truth, and every movement, every look will be intentional. It's my silent conversation with them. The fear hadn't vanished entirely, not for any of them. But now it was overshadowed by something far more potent, a shared sense of purpose, a collective resolve to stand with their king. They would not let anyone dim his light. The stage was set, not just for a concert, but for a fearless declaration. The hours before the crucial show felt like an eternity. A thick, almost palpable tension hung in the air. Backstage, everyone in Elvis's inner circle was on edge, their movements a little sharper, their whispers a little softer. They knew this wasn't just another performance. It was Elvis's defiant response to the looming threat, his declaration of war against the unseen forces trying to control him. The mobster's presence was undeniable. Word had filtered back that not just the silent man, but several of his associates were confirmed to be in the audience tonight. They had bought prime seats front and center, ensuring their glare would be felt, their message received. It was a bold move designed to unnerve. Elvis, however, seemed to have found an almost preternatural calm. He spent the afternoon sequestered in his suite, not practicing lines or moves, but simply meditating. He looked at photos of his family, of Graceland, of his early days on the road. He listened to gospel music, letting the powerful hymns fill his spirit. He remembered the innocent joy of singing for his mother, the raw power of his first performances. This was who he was at his core, and no one was going to take that away. When he finally emerged, dressed in his magnificent white jumpsuit, he exuded an aura of quiet power. His eyes, though serious, held no trace of fear. They held conviction. He moved with purpose, greeting his band members and backup singers with a nod and a reassuring smile. Charlie Hodge was meticulously checking Elvis's guitar. His hands trembling slightly, Elvis placed a calming hand on his shoulder. "Relax, Charlie. It's just another show. The best show we've ever done." Joe Esposito was a whirlwind of activity, checking security, double-checking, the set list ensuring everything was perfect. He caught Elvis's eye and gave a quick, almost imperceptible nod. "All clear, E? We're locked down." The dressing room was unusually quiet. The usual pre-show banter was replaced by a shared sense of focus. The sweet inspirations warmed up their voices, their harmonies weaving a tapestry of sound that was both comforting and powerful. James Burton carefully tuned his guitar, each pluck a precise note in the quiet room. Ronnie Tutt worked his drumsticks, practicing his rolls with intense concentration. Elvis took a deep breath, the scent of hairspray and old velvet filling his nostrils. He walked over to a mirror, looking at his reflection. Not the king, not the icon, just a man from Tupelo, who loved to sing. It was the wellspring of his courage. He thought about the thousands of screaming fans waiting for him, their energy a palpable wave even through the thick walls. They came for the magic, for the escape, for the pure joy he brought. He wouldn't let them down. He wouldn't let fear dictate his performance. He would channel every bit of his emotion, every ounce of his determination, into his voice, into his movements, into the very air of the theater. He knew where the mobsters were sitting. He'd seen the seating chart, the circled seats in the front. He would acknowledge them, not with words, but with a gaze, a particular gesture, a song that spoke volumes without ever needing explanation. He would look them dead in the eye and show them what true power looked like. The stage manager's voice boomed over the intercom. 5 minutes, Mr. Presley." Elvis closed his eyes for a moment, picturing the stage, the lights, the faces in the crowd. He wasn't just going out to sing, he was going out to make a statement that would echo long after the final note faded. He was going out to reclaim his kingdom, to show the world that his crown was forged, not of gold, but of unwavering courage. He was ready to show, and his fearless response was about to begin. The roar of the crowd hit Elvis like a physical wave the moment the curtains parted. Thousands of flashbulbs exploded, turning the darkened auditorium into a galaxy of tiny stars. The energy was electric, a palpable current of anticipation and adoration. Elvis stepped into the spotlight, his white jumpsuit gleaming, and the screams intensified, threatening to tear the roof off the International Hotel. He stood there for a moment, arms outstretched, soaking in the thunderous welcome. He could feel it, the pure, unadulterated love from his fans, a powerful shield against the insidious darkness that had stalked him. He looked out into the sea of faces, his eyes scanning, and then subtly he found them. The group of silent men seated precisely where he knew they would be, their faces impassive, their eyes fixed on him like predators. For a split second he felt a flicker of the old tension, the familiar chill. But then he remembered his purpose. This wasn't about fear. It was about defiance. It was about showing them, not just the mobsters, but the world, that he was the king, and he would not be broken. He launched into his first song, a high-octane rock and roll classic, and the stage exploded with energy. TCB Band was tight, powerful, each member playing with an intensity that matched Elvis's own. James Burton's guitar solos sliced through the air, Ronnie Tut's drums were a relentless heartbeat, and the sweet inspiration's harmonies soared, weaving a rich tapestry of sound. Elvis moved across the stage with a newfound freedom, his hips swaying, his famous sneer playing on his lips. He poured every ounce of his passion into each lyric, each gesture. The audience was mesmerized, caught in the thrall of his performance. They cheered, they sang along, they reached out their hands desperate for a touch, a scarf. He connected with them, throwing scarves, sharing smiles, making eye contact. He felt their love, their unwavering support, and it fueled him. He used that energy, that connection as his weapon. He wasn't just singing, he was pouring his very soul into the room, creating an impenetrable bubble of art and emotion. As the show progressed, Elvis carefully chose his moments. During a particularly soulful ballad, he let his voice crack with raw emotion, looking directly at the section where the mobsters sat. His eyes held the depth of feeling, a vulnerability that was also a profound strength. It was a silent challenge. "You think you can break me? Watch me bare my soul and still stand tall." Later, during an explosive up-tempo number, he moved with a dangerous grace. His karate-inspired moves more pronounced, more powerful. He wasn't just dancing, he was commanding, asserting his physical and artistic dominance. He pointed, he lunged, he spun, a whirlwind of energy and control. Each move was a statement, "I am in control here, you cannot touch me." He could almost feel the mobster's eyes, trying to find a crack in his armor, trying to see the fear they believed they had instilled. But there was none. There was only passion, power, and an unshakable resolve. Midway through the set, he paused, the stage lights dimming to a deep blue. The audience quieted, leaning forward in anticipation. Elvis took a sip of water, his gaze sweeping across the room, lingering for a fraction of a second on the dark, unsmiling faces in the front row. He smiled, a slow, almost challenging smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He then spoke, his voice low, intimate, but carrying to every corner of the room. "You know, some folks try to put a cage around a bird, try to stop it from singing its song. But a bird, if it's got a true heart, it'll sing even louder. It'll sing till the cage breaks, or till the whole world hears its call." A ripple went through the crowd. They didn't understand the double meaning, but they felt the profound truth in his words. It was a moment of pure, unscripted honesty, a connection that went deeper than entertainment. He picked up his guitar, the stage lights brightening, and launched into "My Way." Not the usual version, but one imbued with a fierce, almost defiant intensity. Every lyric was a direct message, a declaration of his freedom, his refusal to compromise. The audience roared, sensing the raw power emanating from the stage, unaware that they were witnessing not just a concert, but the king's fearless, magnificent counterattack. The stage was a crucible and Elvis was the fire. With each song, each swivel, each impassioned lyric of "My Way," he channeled every ounce of his defiance, every shred of his courage. His voice, usually so smooth and melodic now, had an edge, a raw power that cut through the air. He was performing not just for his adoring public, but for the silent, watchful eyes in the front row, a private conversation broadcast to thousands. He sang the lines, "I've faced it all, and I've stood tall, and done it my way," looking directly at the mobsters. There was no aggression, no anger in his gaze, just an unwavering certainty. It was a look that said, "You have no power over me here. This is my domain, this is my truth." As the song reached its crescendo, Elvis's energy became almost superhuman. He hit a soaring note, holding at his chest, expanding his voice, a pure, resonant beam of sound that filled every corner of the arena. It was a note of pure, unadulterated freedom, a sound that could shatter chains. The audience erupted, swept away by the sheer force of his delivery. They were on their feet, screaming, clapping, feeling the profound emotion even if they didn't understand its hidden meaning. He transitioned backling into "Suspicious Minds," and this time the lyrics felt incredibly personal, pointed. We're caught in a trap. I can't walk out because I love you too much, baby. Poured his heart into it. The words reflecting not just a broken relationship, but the invisible trap he felt himself in. Yet his performance wasn't one of defeat, but of resilience. His famous karate moves became more pronounced, sharper, almost symbolic of a man fighting to break free. He spun, he lunged, he dropped to his knees, sweat pouring down his face, his movements precise and powerful. Tore off a scarf, drenched and tossed it into the screaming crowd, a symbol of giving everything, holding nothing back. He saw the mobsters. The silent man in the dark suit remained impassive, but Elvis could detect a subtle shift in his eyes. A flicker of something he hadn't seen before. Was it surprise, frustration, perhaps even a grudging respect? He went into "Can't Help Falling in Love," his signature, closer. But tonight the song was infused with a deeper meaning. It wasn't just about falling in love with a person. It was about his unwavering love for his music, for his fans, for his art. It was a promise, a vow that this love would always win. As the final notes faded, Elvis stood center stage, arms wide, his face a mask of triumph and exhaustion. The crowd was on its feet, a deafening roar of applause and adoration. Took a deep bow, then another and another, acknowledging his band, his backup singers, the orchestra. He glanced once more at the mobsters. This time the silent man was gone, his seat was empty. A wave of immense relief washed over Elvis, but it was quickly replaced by a profound sense of accomplishment. He hadn't just put on a show, he had faced down a threat. Not with fists or threats, but with the very essence of who he was. His voice, his music, his fearless spirit. Backstage, the moment the curtain fell, the air exploded with exhilaration. His band members rushed him, hugging him, slapping him on the back. Joe Esposito clapped him on the shoulder, his face beaming with pride. "You did it, E. You absolutely blew them away." Charlie Hodge, tears in his eyes, handed him a towel. "They didn't stand a chance, King. You sang them right out of the building." Elvis, still breathless, just smiled. He felt drained, but also incredibly alive. He had stood his ground, he had done it his way. And on that stage, under the blinding spotlight, the King had proven himself truly fearless. The air in Elvis's dressing room backstage was thick with triumph and relief. The show had been more than a performance. It had been a declaration. The immediate aftermath was a joyous chaos of backslaps, hugs, and heartfelt congratulations. Elvis, still high on adrenaline, finally felt the heavy cloak of fear lift from his shoulders. Later that night, in the quiet of his suite, Joe Esposito delivered the news. "They're gone, E. The word is, they packed up and left town quietly." Joe grinned. "Looks like they got the message loud and clear. They saw they couldn't scare you, couldn't control you. They probably realized you're more trouble than you're worth." Elvis let out a long, slow breath. He hadn't realized he'd been holding a genuine, unrestrained smile spread across his face. Good. Let them find some other poor soul to bother. He looked at Joe, then at Marty and Larry, who had also gathered. "Thank you, fellas, all of you, for standing by me, for not flinching." Marty Lacker just shook his head. "You kidding, E? We learned from the best. You showed us what courage really looks like tonight. You were incredible." The incident, though never publicly acknowledged, left a lasting mark on Elvis and his inner circle. They had faced a genuine threat, and they had come through it stronger, more united. The bond between Elvis and his TCB band, his Memphis Mafia, and his backup singers deepened. They weren't just colleagues. They were a family forged in the fires of shared adversity. For Elvis, the experience solidified his understanding of his own power, not just as an entertainer, but as a man of integrity. He realized that his stage wasn't just a platform for singing. It was a sanctuary, a pulpit, a battleground where he could express his deepest truths and fight his silent wars. His music became even more potent. Infused with a newfound depth and unwavering conviction, Every performance after that felt like a testament to his unbreakable spirit. The mobsters never bothered him again. They had encountered a force they couldn't intimidate, a man whose art was too pure, whose spirit was too strong to be corrupted or controlled. They sought to diminish him, but instead they inadvertently pushed him to reach new heights of artistic expression and personal courage. The Vegas run continued electrifying night after night. The shows were legendary, fueled by a renewed passion that radiated from Elvis. The audience, unaware of the silent battle that had taken place, simply felt the profound power and authenticity of his performances. They felt his joy, his pain, his defiance, and his boundless love for the music. Elvis often thought about that night. He realized that being fearless didn't mean the absence of fear, but the refusal to be controlled by it. It meant facing down the shadows with the light of his talent, using his voice as his weapon, and standing tall even when his knees wanted to buckle. He was still, the king still showered with adoration, still living a life of unimaginable fame. But now there was a deeper wisdom in his eyes, a stronger resolve in his stance. He had looked into the face of intimidation and answered not with anger but with art. He had proven that true power lay not in force, but in the unwavering strength of one's spirit and the unyielding passion for one's calling. And as he stood on stage night after night, bathed in the spotlight, the roar of the crowd, his constant companion, Elvis knew one thing for certain: he would always do it his way.